before the motorways came, before the out-of-town retail parks, before Britain forgot how to build things that lasted. There was a decade when this country produced some of the most extraordinary motor cars the world had ever seen, not just in the showrooms of the wealthy, but on the roads that ordinary families used every single day. These were the cars your father talked about, the ones your grandparents saved up for, the ones that shaped what Britain was, and perhaps what it still could be. If that means something to you, subscribe to the channel, because this is exactly what we're here for. Number 1, Austin A40 Devon. Before most British families even dreamed of owning a car, there was the Austin A40 Devon. Post-war Britain was tired. Rationing was still a reality. Money was scarce and ambitions were cautious. And yet, somehow, Austin looked at all of that and decided the answer was to build something for ordinary people. The Devon wasn't glamorous. It had 4 doors, a modest 1.2-liter engine, and rounded bodywork that softened its entirely practical purpose. It asked nothing dramatic of the driver. It simply worked. But here's what matters. Nearly 280,000 of them were built. That number isn't a sales figure. It's the story of a generation discovering car ownership for the first time. Families who had never sat behind a wheel suddenly could. You might not have known the Devon by name, but somewhere in a family photograph, parked outside a terrace house, loaded up for a trip to the coast, there's a good chance one of these is in the background. That's what the Devon was. Not a car people remember. A car that made it possible to remember everything else. Number 2, Jensen Interceptor. Not every British car story begins in a large factory. Some begin in a small workshop with a handful of craftsmen who simply refuse to do things the easy way. Jensen came from West Bromwich, a coach builder, not a household name. And in 1950, they built something that had absolutely no business being as beautiful as it was. The body was aluminium, shaped by hand into long, low lines that looked less like a British motor car and more like something that had arrived from considerably further south. An Austin Straight 6 provided the power. Later, a larger engine followed. But the engineering was always secondary to the feeling that this was something rare. And rare it was. Around 50 were ever made. 50. Every Jensen Interceptor this era is an individual object, not a product off a line. Something made by people who cared deeply what the finished thing looked like. Britain in the early 1950s was still rebuilding, still finding its feet. And quietly, in a small workshop in the Midlands, Jensen was building cars that could hold their own anywhere in the world. Some things don't need volume to matter. Number 3, Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud Eye. There are some things Britain has always known how to do, and one of them, when it chooses to, is to produce the finest version of something that exists anywhere on Earth. In 1955, Rolls-Royce launched the Silver Cloud, and it was exactly that. The finest motor car in the world. The styling was composed, unhurried. That silver lady at the front of the bonnet leaned into the wind as though she owned it. Inside, hand-stitched leather, walnut veneer, and carpet so deep they muffled not just sound but worry. Everything closed with the kind of weight that told you, without a word being said, that this was different. The 4.9-liter engine produced a figure Rolls-Royce chose not to publish. When pressed, they offered one word: sufficient. And in a decade still shaking off the long shadow of the war years, that quiet confidence meant something far beyond luxury. It told the world that Britain was still capable of producing the finest things that existed. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, the finest. In 1955, that statement was worth making. Number 4, Jaguar XK140. Britain had proven it could build with refinement. Now it was about to prove it could go very, very fast. The Jaguar XK140 arrived in 1954 as a development of the already celebrated XK120. And it didn't just improve on its predecessor. It transformed what was possible at its price point. Up to 210 horsepower from the twin-cam straight 6. Rack and pinion steering that talked back to your hands. And a top speed approaching 130 miles per hour on roads built for something far more sedate. What the XK140 achieved wasn't just speed. It achieved accessibility. A successful engineer, a committed enthusiast, they could own one of these. They could point it at a Saturday morning road, and feel something genuinely extraordinary. America noticed immediately. Export orders flooded Coventry. Jaguar was no longer a British secret. It was an international reputation, and it had been built on roads not that different from the ones outside your own front door. Number 5, Jaguar XK150. Jaguar, to their credit, looked at what they had built and decided it wasn't finished yet. The XK150 arrived in 1957. Wider body, wraparound windscreen, and something that changed everything. Disc brakes on all 4 wheels. A first for any Jaguar production car, and a genuine step forward for British motoring as a whole. The 3.8-liter S version produced 265 horsepower, top speed beyond 135 miles per hour. But the point wasn't just the speed, it was that now, for the first time, the car could stop to match. That combination transformed the XK150. It wasn't simply a fast car for brave people. It was a fast car you could genuinely trust. A car that rewarded the driver who knew what they were doing and didn't punish them unfairly when they pushed it. Everything Jaguar learned building this car went into the E-Type. And that tells you, perhaps better than anything else, what the XK150 really was. Number 6, Triumph TR3. Some cars in the 1950s tried to charm you. The TR3 simply dared you. Triumph launched it in 1955 and made no apologies for what it was. A proper sports car, one that asked something of the driver before it gave anything back. Minimal weather protection, a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine with no interest in being subtle, and front disc brakes, the first on any British production car, a safety step that the rest of the industry spent years following. It exported brilliantly. American buyers wanted British sports cars, and the TR3 gave them one that was genuinely, seriously fast. That export trade mattered enormously to a Britain still working through its post-war accounts. But back home, what the TR3 built was something harder to measure. A culture, a generation of British drivers who understood that a car was a conversation, not a passenger experience. You steered it, you read it, you worked with it, and when it all came together, when the road was right and the engine was singing, there was nothing else quite like it. Number 7, Morris Minor Series 2. There are cars that promise you the world, and then there are cars that just quietly get on with it. Alec Isagones designed a Morris Minor, and the Series 2 arrived in 1952 with a better engine, improved reliability, and the same fundamental honesty that had made the original so quietly compelling. It went everywhere. Suburban streets in Coventry, market town high streets in Somerset, farm tracks in Shropshire. The Minor never complained about any of it. The steering was the detail that surprised people, rack and pinion, with a responsiveness that shamed vehicles with far grander pretensions. You got a Morris Minor, and it was immediately, unmistakably on your side. The styling carried a warmth that purely functional design never achieves. Rounded, almost friendly, like a car that was glad to see you. Over 1 million were eventually built, not because they were the most exciting thing on the road, because they were the most dependable. And in post-war Britain, dependable was everything. Number 8, Austin Healey 104. Some of the best things happened by accident, or something very close to it. Donald Healey arrived at the 1952 Earl's Court Motor Show with a prototype and measured expectations. Leonard Lord of Austin walked past, stopped, and by the time that show had closed, they had a deal that neither of them had planned. The 104 used a 2.6-liter Austin engine, around 90 horsepower, 0 to 60 in roughly 10 seconds. Top speed of 111 miles per hour. In 1953, that was not modest performance. But what stopped people in the street wasn't the figures. It was the shape. Long bonnet, low roofline, a silhouette that looked like it had been arranged rather than designed. The 104 was beautiful without being showy, confident without demanding attention. America fell for it, deeply and without reservation. And Britain had produced, almost by chance, a car that carried its own mythology from the moment it was unveiled. You don't always plan the best things. Sometimes you simply have to be in the right room. Number 9, Bristol 403. Not every name on this list was building for volume. Some were building for something that can't be measured quite so easily. Bristol came from aircraft, The Bristol Aeroplane Company built machines that had to be right. Absolutely, without exception, right? Failure was not an abstraction in aviation. It had consequences. And when Bristol turned that engineering culture toward the motor car, everything that followed reflected it. The 403 used a 2-liter straight-six of pre-war BMW origin, accessed through post-war arrangements, and refined by Bristol to a standard that went considerably beyond what was necessary for road use. The body was assembled with patience. The fit of every panel reflected a company that genuinely didn't know how to rush. Only 296 were completed. The buyers were typically engineers, aviators, people trained to recognize quality rather than simply respond to advertising. The Bristol 403 made no concessions to fashion or trend. It didn't need to. It simply performed its function to a standard that the years have not diminished. There are still people today who drive them and find nothing to improve upon. Britain has always had craftsmen like that, the ones who refuse to stop at good enough. Number 10, Allard Palm Beach. We close with a car that never quite fitted any category, because its creator didn't much care for categories. Sidney Allard raced his own cars, won his own rally, built machines according to what they felt like rather than what the market expected. And the Palm Beach, launched in 1952, was a departure, a refined open sports car that offered a range of engines depending on how seriously the buyer intended to take things. Ford or Consul, if you wanted something measured. Jaguar if you didn't. It wasn't conventionally pretty, but it had a character so concentrated that conventional prettiness felt, in comparison, rather thin. The Palm Beach attracted a very particular kind of buyer, someone who had looked at everything else and found it somehow insufficient. Sidney Allard understood something that the larger manufacturers occasionally forgot. There are people for whom the sensible answer is not the right answer. People who want a car that speaks to them directly, without preliminary explanation or compromise. The Palm Beach did exactly that. And there are still people who understand precisely why. 10 cars, 1 decade, and a country that, despite everything it had been through, still found ways to produce things the rest of the world stopped to look at. The 1950s didn't just define British motoring. They gave it a soul, a belief that engineering should mean something, that what you build reflects who you are. We don't make many of these things anymore, but we remember them. And if these stories brought something back, a name, a face, a road you used to know, leave in the comments, because those memories are the point. Like the video if it meant something. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you in the next one.